As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Israel is withdrawing its negotiators from Qatar and is blaming the lack of a hostage deal with Hamas on a UN Security Council resolution that called for a Ramadan ceasefire in Gaza. So Hamas officials said on Monday that the Palestinian group was still seeking a hostage deal that included a permanent ceasefire and an Israeli withdrawal from Gaza, and this is a position that Israel has repeatedly rejected. So Netanyahu's office said in a statement, quote, Hamas's stance clearly demonstrates its utter disinterest in a negotiated deal and attests to the damage done by the UN Security Council's resolution, end quote. The statement continued, quote, Hamas has once again rejected an American compromise proposal and has repeated its extreme demands: an immediate halt to the war, the complete withdrawal of the IDF from the Gaza Strip, and leaving in place its administration so that it can repeat time and again the massacre of October 7th as it has promised to do, end quote. So what's interesting is that the U.S. actually rejected Netanyahu's claim that the Security Council resolution was to blame. State Department spokesman Matt Miller said that Netanyahu's position was, quote, inaccurate in almost every respect, and it's unfair to the hostages and their families, end quote. He also said that Hamas prepared this statement before the resolution was passed. And then I just get into a little more of this Netanyahu being angry at the U.S. The U.S. has been downplaying the resolution, saying that it's non-binding and won't impact Israeli military operations. But the UN and other member states, including I saw the U.K., was saying it should be implemented. They're disputing this claim from the U.S., saying that the resolution is binding and must be followed. Realistically, there's no way to enforce this. It's, these UN Security Council resolutions. But the fact that the U.S. is saying that, because, again, it just goes to show the way that they pick and choose to use international law, use the UN when it suits their interests. So this is Alexander Bortnikov. He is the head of Russia's Federal Security Service. He said on Tuesday that the U.S., the UK, and Ukraine could have been involved in this terrorist attack on a concert hall outside of Moscow that killed 139 people. He was asked he was talking to reporters and said that Russia was trying to identify everyone who was involved in the massacre, from the shooters to people who might have orchestrated it. And he was asked, do you think these countries might be involved? And he said, quote, we think that is so. In any case, we are now talking about the information that we have. This is general information, but the investigators also have concrete results, end quote. So this is, of course, concerning, because how might Russia escalate if they believe Ukraine was involved in this attack, if they believe the U.S. and British intelligence was involved in this attack? The ISIS affiliate base in Afghanistan, known as the Islamic State Khorasan province, or ISIS-K, has taken credit for the attack, and this claim has been backed by the U.S. The U.S. came out and said it was ISIS. It definitely wasn't Ukraine, while Russia's still investigating it, so that's a little suspicious. And I think, judging by ISIS-K's recent pattern of attacks and behavior, I think it's certainly possible that it was them, but there's also all sorts of questions about who might have helped them, facilitated the attack. And Putin said on Monday that radical Islamists carried out the attack, but he suggested Ukraine could have been involved. He was saying, we got to find out who ordered it. And he said it was suspicious that the U.S. is trying to convince everybody that Ukraine had nothing to do with this. It's not out of the realm of possibilities, I don't think, for Ukraine to have done some sort of cooperation with ISIS, but it's total speculation. I have no idea. It's just I'm saying basically it's not out of the realm of possibilities is all I'm saying here. And of course, the big concern is that if Russia determines that or believes that, what is the implication there? What's the response going to be? Who knows what that could lead to. So according to Financial Times, the U.S. and Japan will unveil a plan to restructure the U.S. military command in Japan to strengthen operational planning and exercises between the two nations when Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida visits the White House on April 10th. So that's just a couple weeks away. He's going to be in D.C. And there's not too much detail about what this will mean. The only thing the report really says is that it will give the head of U.S. Forces Japan more authority to coordinate with Japan's military rather than having to go through U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, which is based in Hawaii. So other details of the plan are unclear, but it could be related to Japan increasing its military capabilities, as the U.S. has been encouraging Tokyo to move away from its post-World War II constitution, which renounces war and says that armed forces with war potential should never be maintained. So some people call it a pacifist constitution, but they've kind of been moving away from this for a long time. And it was Shinzo Abe that really got the ball rolling, I think, in 2015. He was the Japanese prime minister who was actually assassinated and killed. It was after he was in office, but I forget. That was just was that a few years ago now when he was killed? But anyway, the current government, they've really ramped this up. And at the end of 2022, Japan announced it was increasing its military budget by 56%, and that they're going to acquire Tomahawk missiles, which will be the longest range missiles that they have. They have a range of over 1,000 miles. And this, again, goes against this pacifist constitution that was imposed on Japan by U.S. occupation forces, but now the U.S. is encouraging Japan to build up its military. And it's all about China. Japan has said so explicitly, just like the U.S., that this is about China.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
We're moving up toward Easter time. This was one of the covers of our Trends Journal back in 2000.
Is that George W. Bush that he's chasing?
No, that's one of the Goldman Sachs gang, I think. Just a different bunch of money changers. What's we have? J.P. Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs. I think it's a Goldman Sachs gang. But here it is, Easter time. What happened? I mean, was it 3 days after Christ drove the money changers out of the temple? He's on the cross.
Yeah.
And the money changers are in charge of the world again today.
Yes, they are. Yes, they are. The generation behind us, I don't want to get too deep into this, will probably see digital currency exclusively, and the government will be able to close your bank account if you don't take the vaccine that they want or say what they want you to say. It's terrible, 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 terrible for human freedom where we're going.
Yeah, and that's your article that's coming out tomorrow. It's about freedom and liberty and how we lost it. You said when American colonists were oppressed by British governance, the word most frequently uttered in pamphlets, editorials, and sermons was not safety or taxes. It was freedom. Freedom. It's gone. You're not allowed to think for yourself anymore. I'll be the president, and I'm going to put together a misinformation cabinet so that you'll only believe the crap spewing out of my mouth. And the clowns that I hire, the bureaucrats.
As absurd as that sounds, and I realize you say it with some sarcasm, it's meaningful because that's essentially what the Department of Justice told the Biden administration last week before the Supreme Court in a case involving whether or not the Department of Homeland Security could coerce big tech into manipulating their algorithms so as to advance stories the government wanted and suppress stories the government didn't want. The DOJ actually told the court the government needs to correct misinformation in the marketplace. Stated differently, the government wants to regulate or control or influence the marketplace of ideas. The whole purpose of the First Amendment is to prevent the government from doing it, to keep it entirely and completely and unequivocally and unconditionally out of the business of speech.
And now, as we had warned a long time ago, World War III has begun, and it's just going to keep escalating. And we just saw what happened in Moscow with the slaughter of, now it's up to 140 people are dead. And you get on ISIS's.
So here, this is very interesting. How could anyone accept seriously the statements of the United States State Department, Gerald, within 55 minutes of the attack? The attack took about half an hour, but within 55 minutes of it, the State Department says two things. It wasn't Ukraine, and it was ISIS-K. How could they possibly have known that in that time period? It is now known that there were substantial connections to Ukraine, and it is now generally believed that MI6, the British intelligence, and CIA knew about this and helped not plan and plot it, but trained the people that planned and plotted it, and then they looked the other way. So this is an act of war by the West on Moscow, just like this crazy President Macron now threatening to send 20,000 French troops to Ukraine. That's an act of war. How long does he think those 20,000 troops will survive? Does he think that Russia's just going to let them sit there, armed to the teeth and ready to attack Russia? Of course not.
This is from this week's Trends Journal. Here's one of the articles. French general says his army is ready for war. You ready what he says here? If you want peace, prepare for war. Well, can you imagine the stupidity of this? If you want peace, prepare for war.
If you want peace, prepare to defend yourself. But nobody's attacking France. The West has this myth, is perpetrating this myth that Putin wants to invade Europe. It's absurd. Putin just wants NATO out of Ukraine. That could be done in half an hour. if saner heads prevailed. But Joe Biden wants to run for re-election as a wartime president. I don't know what he's going to do because Ukraine is on its last leg. The Speaker of the House of Representatives is in favor of the $61 billion in aid, but even if it comes, it's too little, too late. Most of it stays here in the U.S. to build more equipment by the military-industrial complex to replace that which has been sent over there. So it's not like we're sending more ammunition. We're building more ammunition here to replace what we've already sent. I don't even know if the members of Congress understand that.
Lloyd Austin tells Gallant, that's the guy heading that's the
Israeli defense minister.
Yep. He said, Israel's security bond is unshakable. Isn't that nice? So Austin said, your security bond is our security bond, and it's unshakable. You ready? The United States is Israel's closest friend, and that won't change. Who the hell is this slob to say this crap? Who are they to say what we, the people of the United States, should support?
Oh, and I don't know if you heard this, Scott, but I think just today, Jake Sullivan is in Kiev again, and he had this amazing statement. He said, the United States will consider Ukraine a victory if it emerges from the war as a sovereign, democratic, and free country. So no more talk about getting your territories back or getting Crimea back or anything. It'll be we talk about moving the goalposts. It'll be a great victory if they actually survive as a country.
Well, yeah, and no more talk about the great strategic victory and the strategic defeat they're gonna inflict on the Russians for daring to try it either.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just gone. So I think that kind of shift in realizing this is an election year, we're getting heavily into the election season. We pretty much know who the two front runners are going to be. Therefore, we need to shift gears out of this losing prospect. So I think that's one of the reasons why Victoria Nuland was out. And remember, she was up for the number 2 post at state, and she could never get confirmed. So that was another big deal. In fact, someone was promoted over her, who's known, I forget the person's name, who is known as a China hawk. So she's a Russia hawk. So she's passed by for a China hawk. So that's bipartisanship. That's the Washington war machine.
Yeah. Well, just to go back one step, that really is the greatest news I've heard all year about Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, climbing way, way down on the Ukraine goals ladder there. Dan, you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. If you just survive as a country, we're going to call it a victory. It's incredible. I mean, at this point, I've thought about this a lot, the $61 billion. Everyone that I listen to and talk to, and we talk to a lot of the same people, Scott, and has said that this $61 billion is not going to change the outcome of the war for a lot of reasons. Number one being that we just don't have the weapons. You can't buy, no matter how much money you have, if there are no weapons to buy, you can't buy them. And we're not manufacturing them. So there's no way it can make a difference in that respect. These are the people that Trump is talking most about, or people around Trump are talking most about as his potential national security team. And they're like Marco Rubio, Tom Cotton, and get this, God, Mike Pompeo.
Yeah.
So if this is anything more, this might be just neocons neoconning, where they'll throw something out there because they wish that was happening.
Yeah.
But if it is indeed happening, it's extremely concerning.
No, it's certainly not surprising.
Not surprising. Yeah. He never gets it. Yeah, they say that Rubio, who serves as vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, could be a fit to head the CIA. Little Marco heading the CIA.
Oh my God. And then, in the middle of the Gaza war, and in a way, it's the best thing about him is that everything he says on whatever issue is always just so over the top.
Yeah.
That it just goes to show how absolutely horrible his thinking is, where he's equating Biden's absolute, unequivocal, full-fledged support for the slaughter in Gaza. And he says, that's selling the Israelis out. That's nothing compared to the violence I'll inflict on those people if I'm given half a chance again.
Yeah.
He's just mad that he's not president right now, so he can be the one helping Netanyahu complete this genocide.
And he's not reading the room because, if you look at the polls, even among the Republican Party voters, people are walking away from Israel as fast as they can. This whole thing has shifted American opinion. I think we talked about a poll on our show where it was something like 52% of Republicans oppose more U.S. military aid to Israel. That's a massive swing. So
wow, yeah, that really is. I hadn't seen that. That's great.
I'll dig it up and send it over to you. But that's Trump not reading the room, and maybe he just doesn't care. You never get punished for being considered too pro-Israel, or you hadn't in the past. But things are changing.
Yeah. Well, and it really is. I mean, and look, I know you poor guy. I don't know how you did it living in Washington, D.C. all those years around all those crazy people. But to me, it is fascinating a little bit, the electoral politics angle. It's not usually my focus, but the politics of politics up there, and how these people have to play this when they're all Israel first. And you just can't be America first when you're Israel first. And you can't even be Biden first if you're Israel first. And that both parties right now are compromising themselves so bad on this issue, where the party leadership is locked up, is just about as horrible as could be, aside from a little bit of posturing by Chuck Schumer. But otherwise, it's like it's the people versus the leadership of the parties in both parties, and more all the time.
Yeah, but the Schumer thing is a scam. That's that's a desperate attempt to pull Biden's chestnuts out of the fire, because that whole little routine was basically Schumer saying this is all the fault of the right-wing Netanyahu. We of course are distancing ourselves from the right-wing Netanyahu, trying to erase some of the damage that Biden has done to his own voter base by his absolute blind adherence to whatever Israel is doing in Gaza. So that whole thing was a completely transparent attempt by Schumer to blame everything on the right wing, allied with Trump, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Although, yeah, I can see that working on American Democrats, but what about the rest of the world? Because what he said in the speech about how's Israel going to survive if it's an absolute pariah state on the planet, that still stands. Because even if it's Benny Gantz or whoever's next, you're either going to give these people citizenship or independence or the status quo. And if it's the status quo, I don't see the rest of the planet being so appeased by a speech in the Senate,
Live from Run Your Mouth World Headquarters, it's today's Run Your Mouth. So here you go. Did you guys watch this? You get this ship. It's like someone was like, all right, I think I lined it up. Turn off the lights. Pretend like the powers went out. Now, listen, I have no idea. I don't ride boats. I don't know the engineering on bridges. But, talk about a wild accident. If you wanted to sit down and be like, what could be a really expensive accident? They got no fail-safes on boats to just shut the thing down. You can't start throwing anchors off of it. I know nothing about boats. I don't know that if it starts being hacked, well, you can't say that. No one knows that the thing was actually hacked. You guys think, well, what's fun about this? We'll come back to this myocarditis article in a minute, is now we're going to see endless diagrams on Twitter from everyone's grandpa who pretends that they know how boats work. You're going to see every wild explanation in the world of, well, because of the currents, this was a natural occurrence for a boat to steer in that way. Oh, no, I know the exact logistics and the math, and you're going to see people doing the geometry of how quickly you could steer a boat. And all of a sudden it's going to be somebody installed a commercial engine onto this thing because normally boats can't even turn that fast. And it was only because this thing was installed on that specific boat that it was even able to turn at that radius. And then you're going to hear other people saying, no, boats turn at that radius all the time. Point that I'm trying to say is we're never going to know, but we will get to hear every single wild person's explanation where you sit there with your jaw down, just nodding like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I mean, waves at a certain angle can absolutely prevent a boat like that from steering. Oh, I heard that boat is usually packed with more things on it, so it couldn't have possibly moved at that. I'm just saying we're going to be in for a long and wild ride of bullshit, which is kind of my specialty. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this thing develops. But is there like a book out there on Amazon of how to destroy critical infrastructure in America? Does everything in our country have is everything like a house of cards that if you just know, it's almost like the Death Star, that if you just hit that one point on the Death Star, the whole thing will crumble? Is all of our infrastructure have like little tiny levers all in them that if you just touch that one thing, the whole thing's going to fall apart? Every building's got one little column in the basement that the whole thing just relies on that one column. It just seems a little odd that these bridges are built. You just have to hit one of the things, the whole thing's going to collapse. And anyway, so back to myocarditis, because we know how reliable he's been in regards to people pouring over our border. Not an emergency. Whole situation's under control. It's been under control the whole time. We would have it under even more control if the Republicans would just pass our legislation to legalize everyone that's coming over. So let's see what myocarditis had to say in regards to whether or not this was terrorism, which here's what he said. Mayorkas said cargo ship collision was not intentional act. Homeland Security DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said there are no indications the collision of the cargo ship which caused the collapse of the bridge in Baltimore was an intentional act. He added that the U.S. Coast Guard overseas by DHS was on the scene along with our state and local partners and is actively involved in search and rescue operations this morning. What do you guys think? Let's go to the chat for a second. You guys think that this was people hacked into the boat, starting to go for our critical infrastructure? The Russians or someone else are starting to get their revenge on us? The Israelis are warning us that we better support what's going on. Who do you think might have been responsible for this? You think someone stuck over the border, captured this boat? They don't want to tell us the story? Or you think that this was just a freak accident, power outage, things steered right into a column? Let's take a look at the comments, see what people have to say. The bridge had it coming. That's from Edward Snowman. Yeah, I actually saw that bridge move and walk right into the boat. That's what I saw. At Runaway Slob, at Robbie the Fire, they want to rename the bridge and make it a giant rainbow. There we go. And let's take one more comment. We fail at everything, but it's Republicans at fault. All right, moving forward. What do we got next, Mr. Producer Man? In terms of having to deal with this kind of topics inserted into every single walk of life, this was reported in Zero Hedge. Museum claims dinosaurs have LGBTQ history and brides are queer. A museum in Britain has claimed that some birds are queer and that the history of animal queerness has been hidden from the public. Animals have been queer the whole time. It's not that even I guess it's like you're not even born gay. It's that we've suppressed gayness by trying to pretend like it's not overwhelming in nature. And if people understood how robust gayness has been going all the way back to the dinosaurs, everyone would feel more comfortable with this. And then you're like just trying to be in a museum with your kid. And you're like, why is this T-Rex banging another T-Rex in front of me? Why do I have to look at this picture? And why do they put giant wieners on the T-Rexes to let me know that they were both men? But no, everything's got to be inserted everywhere all the time so that we're always aware. Point over. All right, couple quick topics, and then that's our episode. ISIS attack in Russia. We talked about that on on a recent part of the problem. It does seem it's another just crazy story. Isn't it amazing how many just crazy stories we've had recently where the official narrative isn't even much of a story other than we don't know or there's no information at this time? It does seem like this is why we shouldn't be having casual wars with people, because casual wars do seem to escalate. And so, and if there was any tie-ins with our intelligence communities or otherwise, trying to strike out at Russia. And then it's interesting that 2 days later, we got a boat that goes directly into a bridge. And then we go, oh, that had nothing to do with hacking or terrorism.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
It's not that things can't get better. It's that things can't go back. They can't go back to the way they were. You can't reverse entropy.
No, can I just get clarification on that? When you say things can't go back, you hear the left saying a lot of times, you can't turn back the clock. Mm-hmm. And what they mean by that is that once a left-wing innovation has taken root, it's there forever. And so if you want to reverse it, forget about it, because the clock moves in one direction. And and the Whig theory of history says that we just progress onward and upward toward the left-wing utopia. Now, the Whig theory of history didn't necessarily mean that, but it did mean that history is not really zigzag. It really is kind of a line like this. And so I know you're saying you can't just say, well, we'll just recreate the conditions of the 1950s just like that in 2024.
And even if you could, in 10 years, you'd have the 1960s because you'd precisely replicated the same conditions that produced
Yes, exactly. That's right. Yeah, I've said this for the longest time. There must have been something wrong with the 50s if they led to the 60s, right?
Exactly.
So there must have been something wrong. But you're certainly not saying that no left-wing gain can never be overturned. I think you're kind of saying you can't just transplant with a time machine a whole society from X number of years ago and just start it all over again. But surely we can overturn some of the craziness.
Well, you can.
I don't know how, but we can.
Well, I don't know how either, but you can't. How do I put it? The original system of the 1950s was outcompeted and overcome by what came after. And so to say that you're going to just sort of revert to an earlier save of the society, it's like, well, it's just going to get beaten again in the exact same way. And plus, you're in this situation where you're not only existing or trying to instantiate this outdated system. And by outdated, I don't mean, morally inferior or whatever, like the way the left means. I mean, outcompeted. It was defeated and defeated for like very clear, understandable reasons. If you try to instantiate that, not only are you trying to create an outmoded, a defeated system, but you're also like trying to create it as a zoo, as like a nature preserve for your little past ideology, which takes tons of energy and resources.
Before we go into other approaches to this problem that we face, I want to know if in your opinion, you could, I feel like if you ever do achieve the kind of society you want, even then you can't like rest on your laurels, because there's always these things are obviously unstable and you have to preserve what you've built. But I guess my question is, how can somebody like you or somebody like me, how can we ever win, for any length of time when it seems as if it's inevitable that any society we build will be put upon by the same kind of people who have wrecked every society? That is to say, we being like conservative minded are not really thinking about bringing the blessings of natural rights all around the world. Okay, now some people thought that's what conservatives favor, but that's because they're dumb. We care about what's closest to us. We understand that our sentiments and our sympathies extend in a series of concentric circles. They don't start in Ukraine. They start here with your home. And if your home's a mess, but all your attention is on how bad Putin is, there's something wrong with you. Like mentally, something wrong with you. So we have finite goals because also we have a view of human beings, that they're not perfectible, they're not infinitely malleable. We're not going to engage in vast social experiments on them. We're happy if we can have a decent, livable society where we are. But we're always going to be up against the builders, the revolutionaries, the builders of revolutionary societies, the destroyers generally, and people who frankly don't care about these matters of hearth and home and the kinds of sentiments that you and I might have. And they're the kind of people who, when they see something like this, their every instinct says destroy, 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 undermine, and destroy. How can we ever win? Because we're not that way. We're busy working and raising families. We don't think that way. So aren't we always going to be defeated by people whose job it is to upend traditional societies?
Well, there's a cycle to it, right? Because that impulse to destroy, obviously by definition can't hold itself together. And so it's a question of how bad does the pain have to get for the people who are temperamentally opposed to conflict, opposed to upheaval, it's just the Declaration of Independence when a long train of abuses, that's where the line is. And part of what I talk about in the episode is that the people controlling the present system are vulnerable to entropy, in some ways more vulnerable to entropy than we are. In the exact same way, the world's changing on them too. And their philosophy and their ideology is purpose built for our existing managerial economic system, whereas what we have are some timeless principles, hopefully.
Well, first, I want to kick this off with a few choice quotes from the founding generation to give us an idea of how things are supposed to be. Here from John Jay, who ended up being the first Chief Justice of the United States. And he said, "With respect to the protection of national industry, I take it for granted that it will always flourish where it is lucrative and not discouraged, which was the case in North America when I left. Every man then being at liberty by the law to cultivate the earth as he pleased, to raise what he pleased, to manufacture as he pleased, and to sell the produce of his labor to whom he pleased, and for the best prices, without any duties or impositions whatsoever." So that's how this first Chief Justice looked at, the best for industry in the United States. Basically, to manufacture as you choose how to do it. And then if you aren't controlled by government and no one is forced to buy or sell anything, then it's up to people if they choose they want to purchase. This is a very free market mentality. So was Pelatiah Webster in his essay on free trade and finance, someone I don't quote very often, but a good one. "I propose to take off every restraint and limitation from our commerce. Let trade be as free as air." Or how about Thomas Jefferson? Now, these types of views were very, very common, even though they weren't universal. But Thomas Jefferson's view here in his first inaugural address, he's basically establishing the policies of the federal government in March of 1801. So you'll be able to see how different things are today from Jefferson's policy. He said, "A wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned." Don't tax the people. Don't tax them. This is the sum of good government. That's how Jefferson defines good government. And as Elizabeth Nolan Brown over at Reason puts it, the absurd Apple antitrust lawsuit. She writes that the U.S. Department of Justice, the DOJ, and 16 states are suing Apple over its alleged monopoly of the smartphone market. I can tell you, I have two smartphones. I have one that's an Apple product for personal use and one for the 10th Amendment Center of business use, which is an Android product. If it was a monopoly, they of course define monopoly in a very weird way, but a monopoly means a monopoly. I couldn't own those two phones, first of all. I should just point out that absurd point of it. Anyways, that's not how government views these things. She says it's an absolutely bonkers lawsuit based on weird ideas about business and even weirder ideas about government. And unfortunately, weird in this this kind of context does not mean unusual or strange. Unfortunately, it's very common. She said the Apple lawsuit shows just how eager the Biden administration is to bring business decisions under federal control. And I wouldn't blame just the current administration. I think it's just building upon where things were left to it. And of course, the current one's always going to be worse than the previous one overall, if you zoom out and you get a big picture of it. And more from the complaint here. They say Apple's smartwatch, Apple Watch, is only compatible with the iPhone. So if Apple can steer a user towards buying an Apple Watch, it becomes more costly for that person to switch because they have to get an iPhone. And I was thinking about getting one of these smartwatches for my mom as she's aging to kind of have some of the health monitoring and things like that. And I was thinking, maybe an Apple smartwatch. But it doesn't really work with her Android phone. So it doesn't do all the things that I want it to do. So I'm going to have to look at other options. But again, is it that I want the government to force Apple to make it work with these other platforms? I think that's absurd. That's bad. That's really dangerous because the power that you give government to do something, to force first of all, if you're okay with using force, because ultimately what this gets down to is they have to use the threat of violence to make this happen. There is no freedom in this. Like, yeah, maybe I would like Apple to be able to make their product more compatible, or I would like Google to make their product more compatible with certain things. But as soon as you get down to saying, well, if you don't do it, I want dudes with guns to be able to show up your door and to shut you down or to fine you and control you, then I am a terrible human being. I mean, that's ultimately what it gets down to. I want to vote with my dollars and purchase the products that I'm going to purchase that are best for me and then not purchase the ones that are not best for me. That's really ultimately what it gets down to. Now, most people, as I was mentioning, when they're discussing this, they're really debating whether the DOJ's claims are correct or not. And I kind of fell into that a little bit as well when I was talking about iMessage, talking about the values of it and the benefits, like, oh, this is a good thing, and here's the reason why they did this. And I don't think that even really needs to be said because that can be covered all over the place. And whether Apple is right or wrong in their business decisions is ultimately going to fall on them. And I think most people are ignoring what I think you're probably understanding that I'm getting to here, which is the underlying fundamental issue here. But ultimately, the people who run their business, as John Jay was saying at the beginning, as Thomas Jefferson, they have to have the freedom to manufacture things as they please, because ultimately, that's how you learn what works and what doesn't work. And then the market responds in certain ways. Let's say you love the idea of government going after Apple. Let's say you hate Apple for whatever reason. That's cool. Let's say you think these are good end results. Whatever your goal is, you have to think if government is going to use a power for something you like, eventually the worst person on earth, your ultimate enemy, is going to have that same power, and they probably will not use it in ways that you want them to use it. In fact, it'll probably be opposite. And that's how John Jay described things in 1788. He said, remember that a power to do good always involves a power to do harm. He was the first Chief Justice. Here's the third Chief Justice, Oliver Ellsworth, back in 1787. He wasn't the Chief Justice at that point, but this was in the ratification debates. He said, a power of doing good always implies a power to do evil if the person or party be disposed.
First clip. Now, this is from a Gallup poll that just was released today, I believe, just before we started the show. Which is majority of Americans now oppose Israeli action in Gaza, as you mentioned, Dr. Paul, Gallup poll. Let's look at a couple of the numbers from Axios. They do a good job at summarizing it. Driving the news, 55% of Americans disapprove of Israel's military response in Gaza. Now, this is incredible. A 10 percentage point increase since November. 10% increase in the amount of people who disapprove. About 1 in 3 of Americans, that's 36%, approve of Israel's military actions in Gaza, according to a new poll. 36%, only a little over 1 in 3 Americans approve. That's down from the aftermath of the Hamas October 7th attack, when a November poll found that half of Americans approve. So that's a big shift downward. They go on to say among Republicans, the percentage who approve of Israel's actions has dropped from 71% in November to 64% in March. So even among Republicans, who generally are the most pro-Israel group, that is a significant drop. But the dip is even sharper, writes Axios, among Democrats. Fewer than 1 in 5, that is 18%, say they approve of Israel's actions. That's down from 36% in November. So the approval among Democrats has dropped in half. And among people who identify as independents, the approval rating has dropped from 47 to 29 in that span. So dramatic numbers, Dr. Paul, out of America on this, what's happening in Gaza right now. And they are going, I would say, not necessarily against Israel, more probably importantly, and I'll have some info later, against Joe Biden.
You know, during an election year, there are a lot of polls going on, and a lot of them are very biased, and you have to pick and choose because some will be put out by campaign. But I think Gallup still has maintained some integrity because we put more weight on it.
Yeah.
And if they come up short, it could be a mistake or something, but it's still something that they rely on. It's not like, this poll was ordered by the president, so it must be a great poll.
Yeah.
So no, I think this is great news that the shifting has occurred. Hopefully this will make a difference in bringing peace in not only in the Middle East and Israel, but also in Ukraine and these other places, because there's some statistics now about what's happening in Ukraine and how foolish it is.
Yeah.
And the more foolish it gets, the more they have to, to say, we're going to win. We can't win, but we're going to keep fighting until we win. That kind of stuff.
Good comment. Well, we'll close out the show with our third story. And this is, I think, I would put this in the category of the Western world, if you want to call it that, has just been living in the land of delusion. Now, we discussed how in the newest British destroyer ships, I think, they had to put gymnasiums in where the missiles were because they couldn't afford missiles, right? So they're ready to go toe-to-toe with Russia. They're ready to go to war with Russia, but they're going to be riding on their stationary bikes instead of firing missiles over there. That probably will scare them. But anyway, so this came out this morning. There was a hearing in the British Parliament. UK general admits the military couldn't fight Russia for more than a couple of months. And here we're like over 2 years into this war in Ukraine. Go to the next one. So here's what happened. UK General Rob McGowan admitted in a committee meeting on March 26 that the UK's military couldn't fight Russia for more than a couple of months because we don't have the ammunition and reserves of equipment to do it. The striking admission was the latest warning from UK defense and military officials, cautioning that the country is unprepared for armed conflict. Officials from other NATO countries have repeated similar concerns.
But you know why that statement is out right now? This is the way they make their requests.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this bad, and we're going to scare the people, but they're having more trouble scaring the people, and they're changing the American people's mind. We're sick and tired of it.
Yeah.
We're sick and tired of it. We better start taking care of our problems rather than Cowtown.
See, that's exactly what I thought. We're on the same wavelength. I thought, okay, on one hand, this is a real hardcore admission that we can't fight. But the other one, it's like, remember when the neocons in Congress, we have a hollowed out military. We spend $1 trillion a year. It's hollowed out. We need to spend more. So you're absolutely right, I think, on that.
And they say we're down to nothing. And what was it? Yesterday I mentioned where they finally got some money and it was paying, we can go out and buy more bullets. They say, well, we've already used those bullets.
Yeah, we already paid for them.
But they protect themselves. You're not allowed to audit. You're not allowed to have somebody supervising and looking where all this stuff goes.
Yes. We'll go to the next clip. This is a little bit more about the story. It's worth looking at. So this is the same hearing in the UK Parliament. McGowan's acknowledgement on March 26 went even further as he responded to a direct question from lawmaker Mark Francois about the ability of the UK to fight Russia. Quote, this is the lawmaker, the member of Parliament, "We're not ready for an enduring war. Do you accept that?" Francois asked, to which McGowan responded, "Yes, absolutely." Quote from Francois, "We could not fight an enduring war against Russia. Drop all these euphemisms about pure adversaries." Francois continued. So he's basically saying, cut the BS. You can't fight. Military's not ready to fight. Stop rattling sabers. And I just looked back just to January. If you put this next, this is from Politico. This shows the disconnect among the ruling class. This is from Politico in January. "British public should be ready to fight Putin," UK Army chief says. So on the one hand, we got to get ready to fight Putin. But when it comes down to brass tacks, they say we don't have any ammunition, we don't have any people, and we can't do it.
So the UK Defense Secretary Shapps said that the situation in which the UK would fight Russia alone is unlikely. And I wrote a big surprise.
Yeah.
So
that's why I think it's dangerous because we had Macron last week talking about we want to put some French soldiers in Ukraine. Russia said, okay, they're going to be a priority target. I think what these countries are doing is they are assuming that NATO is the U.S. and the U.S. will back them up. And I think that's dangerous because I think it causes them to do reckless things like this, like being tougher than they should be when they don't have anything behind them.
See, I think that this is going to continue. And it's going to get less effective than ever because eventually we're out of money and we're losing people's trust in us and expectations, so they will lose confidence in the dollar, and all this stuff will have to cease. But because that involves subjectivity in how people react and how foreigners react to us, because they don't seem to think that we'll ever quit sending them money, but eventually we'll quit sending them money with value, and that's when the whole thing would end.